Let me tell you something strange about people who can't give up, even when exhausted. We live in a world that celebrates resilience, but rarely questions what it costs. Maybe you're one of them, and maybe no one has ever explained why you keep going long after your body begged you to stop. If you want to understand what drives you without labels and have language to explain yourself without justifying, stay with me. Here, we translate psychology into relief, not diagnosis. We speak about the weight you carry in silence, the kind the world mistakes for strength but never asks if you wanted to hold. The world calls this persistence, determination, grit. But what if it's something else entirely? What if the inability to give up isn't strength at all, but a quiet form of survival you learned so early you forgot it was a choice? Perhaps it's not about winning. Perhaps it's about proving you exist by never stopping, because somewhere along the way, rest became synonymous with disappearing. There's a virtue hidden here, one the world rarely names, the capacity to endure beyond logic, to function in the space between collapse and continuation. But virtues born from necessity often feel more like prisons than gifts. We live in a culture that glorifies endurance but punishes exhaustion, where pushing through is celebrated and pausing is seen as weakness. Social media feeds us images of people who never quit, but rarely shows the crash that comes after. The language itself reveals the trap. We say someone gave up, as if stopping were betrayal, as if rest were surrender. But maybe the real noise is this: the constant hum of having to prove you're worthy by never being done. Psychologists call it chronic activation, the state where your nervous system forgets how to distinguish between threat and safety. Your body becomes a machine that only knows forward, and forward becomes the only proof of aliveness. This pattern has roots. Often, it begins in childhood, in homes where love felt conditional on achievement, where being needed meant being valuable. Psychologists describe this as learned persistence, a coping mechanism born from environments where stopping meant losing attention, safety, or worth. You learned that your value wasn't inherent, it was earned. And earning required motion. So you moved. You kept moving. Even when your bones ached and your mind begged for silence, you moved, because stopping felt like erasure. This isn't discipline. This is survival dressed in productivity's clothes, a nervous system that never learned it was allowed to land. Of course, not all of this comes from trauma. Sometimes it's temperament. Sometimes it's the stubborn hope that if you just keep trying, the world will finally soften. And sometimes it's both. There's courage here, real courage, in the refusal to let circumstances define your spirit. But there's also fear. The fear that if you stop, you'll discover you were never enough to begin with, that the motion was the only thing keeping you from facing the emptiness underneath. And that's okay, because even fear is a form of caring. It means something inside you still believes you matter enough to protect, even if the protection has become the wound. Here's what the world doesn't tell you. Not giving up isn't the same as moving forward. Sometimes persistence is just circling the same pain, hoping repetition will turn it into progress. You're not climbing a mountain, you're running on a treadmill, and the incline keeps rising. Refusing to give up doesn't mean you're weak. It means somewhere, someone taught you that your worth was in your usefulness, your capacity to withstand, your ability to keep going when others would rest. And you believed them. Not because you were naive, but because you were young, and the young survive by adapting. You adapted, you learned to function in exhaustion. And now, even when the danger is gone, your body still thinks it's running. Think of someone who worked 3 jobs to keep their family fed, who couldn't stop because stopping meant hunger. Or the artist who painted through grief because creation was the only language their pain understood. Or you, perhaps, pushing through another day, not because you want to, but because you've forgotten how not to. Studies show that people with high persistence often experience what's called goal gradient effect, where proximity to completion drives continued effort even past the point of diminishing returns. But the most painful truth is this: sometimes we keep going, not because we're close to finishing, but because we don't know who we'd be if we stopped. You can learn to distinguish between endurance and entrapment. You can say, "I'm not giving up. I'm giving myself permission to rest so I can continue in a way that doesn't destroy me." This is wisdom, not weakness. You can honor the part of you that survived by pushing through, while also releasing it from the belief that motion equals worth. Persistence is beautiful when it serves your growth. But when it becomes the bars of your own cage, when you're so afraid of stopping that you've forgotten why you started, then maybe the bravest thing isn't to keep going. Maybe it's to finally, gently land. Not all motion is progress. Sometimes the deepest journey is the one that leads you back to stillness, back to the self you abandoned in the rush to prove you mattered. And maybe people who can't give up aren't failing at surrender. Maybe they're just carrying a question they've never been allowed to ask. What if I'm enough, even when I'm not moving, even when I'm done? If this gave you words for what you've always felt, stay. Here, we speak about the exhaustion the world mistakes for dedication, and the quiet rebellion of finally choosing yourself. Perfeito. Aqui estão os últimos 5 capítulos. There's a particular loneliness that comes with this kind of exhaustion. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who admire your strength while you're quietly dissolving inside. They see someone who never quits, someone dependable, someone who always finds a way. But they don't see the cost. They don't see the nights you've lain awake, body vibrating with fatigue, but mind unable to stop strategizing, planning, pushing. This is what psychologists call high-functioning depletion, a state where you continue to perform while your internal resources drain to nothing. You become a well that everyone draws from, including yourself, never noticing it's been dry for months. And the cruelest part? You've become so good at functioning on empty that even you can't tell the difference anymore. The inability to give up often masks itself as purpose, but underneath, it's frequently terror. Terror of disappointing others, terror of confirming your deepest fear, that without achievement, without motion, without proof of your perseverance, you are forgettable. This fear has a name in psychology: contingent self-worth, the belief that your value fluctuates based on external validation and accomplishment. When your worth is contingent, rest feels like risk. Stopping feels like suicide of the self. So you keep going, not because the goal still matters, but because stopping would mean confronting the question you've been running from. Who am I when I'm not overcoming something? The answer terrifies you, so you create new mountains to climb, new battles to fight, new reasons to never arrive at the silence where that question lives. But here's what changes everything. The opposite of giving up isn't pushing through, it's discernment. It's the ability to ask yourself, is this persistence serving my growth, or is it serving my fear? True strength isn't about endurance at any cost. It's about knowing when to hold on and when to release, when to fight and when to lay down your sword. The people who truly thrive aren't the ones who never quit. They're the ones who know the difference between a challenge that will transform them and a situation that will simply consume them. They've learned that some endings aren't failures. Some endings are the most intelligent decision your exhausted body can make. The moment your nervous system finally trusts you enough to say, "I've carried this far enough." There's a Buddhist concept called wise effort, which teaches that not all striving is equal. Some effort moves you toward liberation. Some effort keeps you trapped in cycles of suffering. The question isn't whether you should give up or keep going. The question is, what are you actually fighting for? Is it a vision that still lights you up, or is it simply the fear of what it would mean to stop? Are you persisting because you believe in the destination, or because you're terrified of the emptiness that might exist without the struggle? These questions require stillness to answer, and stillness is precisely what you've been avoiding, because stillness doesn't let you hide behind motion. Stillness makes you feel everything you've been outrunning. Imagine what it would feel like to finally stop. Not to give up on your dreams, but to give up on the belief that your worth is earned through suffering. To release the idea that rest is something you have to deserve, that peace is something you access only after you've paid for it in exhaustion. What if you could pursue your goals from a place of fullness rather than depletion? What if the most radical thing you could do isn't to push harder, but to trust that you're allowed to be human? Research on sustainable achievement shows that peak performers aren't the ones who work until collapse. They're the ones who understand recovery as part of the process, not a reward for completion. They've learned that you can't pour from an empty cup, and that martyrdom masquerading as dedication helps no one, least of all yourself. The truth is, people who can't give up are often people who never learned they were allowed to need help. Somewhere in your history, you absorbed the message that asking for support was weakness, that struggle was meant to be solitary, that if you couldn't do it alone, you shouldn't do it at all. So you became an island. You became the person others leaned on, never imagining you might need someone to lean on too. This is called counter-dependent attachment in psychology, a pattern where you compulsively give support while being unable to receive it. You've built an identity around being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who endures, and now that identity has become a cage. Because if you admit you're tired, if you admit you need rest, if you admit that maybe you can't do this alone, who will you be then? Perhaps the answer is simpler than you think. You'll be human, beautifully, perfectly, ordinarily human, not a machine, not a martyr, not a monument to perseverance. Just someone doing their best, sometimes succeeding, sometimes stumbling, sometimes choosing to stop, not because they've failed, but because they've learned that self-betrayal in the name of achievement is still betrayal. You can honor everything you've overcome while also acknowledging that you're allowed to be done. You can celebrate your capacity to endure while also recognizing that survival mode was never meant to be a permanent state. The nervous system that kept you alive through chaos deserves to know it's safe now, that rest isn't abandonment, that stopping isn't the same as erasing yourself. Think about the language you use. When you say, "I can't give up," what are you really saying? Are you saying, "I believe in this path"? Or are you saying, "I'm terrified of what it means if I stop"? Are you saying, "This matters to me"? Or are you saying, "My worth depends on completing this"? The distinction matters because one comes from love and the other comes from fear, and fear will drive you into the ground while calling it purpose. You can rewrite this. You can say, "I'm choosing to continue because this aligns with who I'm becoming, and I'm also choosing to rest because my body is not a resource to be depleted." Both can be true. Persistence and self-compassion aren't opposites. They're partners, and you've been forcing them to fight when they could have been dancing. There's a specific kind of freedom that comes when you finally give yourself permission to be tired. Not forever, not as an identity, just for now. To say, "I've done enough today, I've been enough today, I can stop without disappearing." This is radical for someone like you, someone whose entire operating system was built on the belief that stopping equals failure. But maybe the real failure is never allowing yourself to land, never giving yourself the grace to be human in a world that demands you be superhuman. Maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't pushing through one more day. Maybe it's sitting down in your exhaustion and saying, "I'm not broken for being tired, I'm just human," and that's enough. Not every race needs a finish line. Sometimes the victory is in recognizing you were never meant to run forever, that the pursuit of worthiness through endurance was a story someone else wrote, and you've been reading from their script for so long you forgot you could write your own. And maybe people who can't give up aren't lost. Maybe they're just looking for permission to rest without losing themselves in the stillness. So here it is, you're allowed to stop. You're allowed to be done. You're allowed to choose yourself over the person you thought you had to be. What part of you has been waiting your whole life to hear that? If this gave you language for the exhaustion you've been carrying alone, stay. Here, we honor the strength it took to keep going, and the wisdom it takes to finally, gently, stop.